Okay, Old 6 Mile Cemetery is on Henry Harris Road in Indian Land. Are you familiar with the area? Know where that is? It's as the crow flies, probably 10 miles from here in a direct direction. But it's right on the road. And if you look at this piece of road right here in front of it, it's what was called the Great Wagon Road that came down from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, all the way down through West Virginia, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, right on through, guess what? Lancaster, South Carolina. Where did that name come from? And through Camden and on to Charleston. It was Indian trails, and it was already used in the early settlers before the 1600s, right on through the 1700s and 1800s, because there were no roads. And when you two guys get in the car and go with your mom, y'all go on highways like this. Then they got in wagons like are in the museum, and they left Lancaster, and they hoped they got wherever they were going days, months, years sometimes. And they had to put all the stuff that they needed in the wagons, and they hunted and picked berries and whatever to get to where they wanted to be down here in South Carolina, North Carolina, and beyond. Now, just if you are doing 521 and you know where Old Steel Creek Road is that goes into Van Wyck, if you go that direction, the Indian Trail cuts over there and goes all the way to Augusta. At Charlotte, the Indian Trail splits off and coming from the north from Lancaster, but there's also a long trail that comes down from Philadelphia through Baltimore and through Virginia. And a lot of the settlers that are buried in Old 6 Mile Cemetery are from Virginia, and then the others came down from Lancaster, Virginia, or Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Okay. Old 6 Mile Cemetery, we found it about 10 years ago. At the time, I was commander of a newly formed American Legion post, and we were looking for a project to do because all American Legion posts do those kinds of things for veterans. And the easiest one for us to do at that time was to put flags on veterans' graves. So my chaplain and I went around looking at the different churches around Indian Land to see if we could put out flags, and everybody was booked. So we went to a newly formed church called Faith Presbyterian Church. It's at the intersection of 521 and Van Wyck Road. It's the old church back there in the corner. Little did we know that this cemetery belonged to that church. Well, when we were asking the pastor, could we put flags out on their cemetery there, he said, sure, we're new, knock yourself out. When we walked out the door, my chaplain said, I heard there's an old abandoned cemetery down the road. You know, in the South, we give directions. It's down the road, over a piece, and when you get to the big tree, you go that way. So it was down the road, and we went to see where exactly it was. And we found it. Now this is an early picture. When we found it, it was completely grown over. There's a man that lives behind it, and he doesn't own the cemetery itself, but he lives directly behind it. And he's a Vietnam veteran, semi-recluse gentleman who cherishes his privacy very much. And when we got out of the car, Marvin was my chaplain, and I said to Marvin, he's from Boston, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and I talk funny, I know that. And Marvin, I said to Marvin, who has this deep Boston accent, and I saw this guy coming towards us, and I said, I think, Marvin, it's best you don't say anything and let me do the talking, or we're going to get shot directly. So he did, and I've become fast friends with him, and he helps me with the cemetery. This part of this presentation is how I went about restoring stones. There were a number of broken stones in there, and some of how I read the stones and so forth. This settlement, it was called 6 Mile Creek Settlement, was probably started in the very early 1700s. And it was a community cemetery, and that road that you saw, the wagon road, at that particular time, it was the border between North Carolina and South Carolina. The cemetery that we're looking at was in South Carolina. When you crossed the wagon road, which was probably only 6-8 feet wide at the time, the church was there. And the church was in North Carolina, cemetery in South Carolina. It had various names over the time before it settled at Old 6 Mile Cemetery. It was the Morrow family cemetery. It was 6 Mile Creek Cemetery, and it was 6 Mile Settlement Cemetery. Finally, when it became a church, 6 Mile Creek Cemetery, approximately 1765, and they had their first minister, a pastor. Then it became Old 6 Mile Creek Cemetery. This stone that you saw me was you can go ahead. I'm going to focus on stones now. I told Megan, and my wife knows this, that when I do talks, I tend to do what squirrels do. They go off in this direction and then that direction. And it happens to be what's on my mind at the time. And it actually has something to do with the topic. If you listen long enough, I'll come back to where it was. Okay, the first stone when we uncovered all the debris and everything, Jane Coffey, she was broken in half. That's how she laid at that time on the ground. And very small stone, and it was such that I could pick it up and take it home. And I made what's called a leveling table in the garage, so that as I pieced her back together, it would fit perfectly. And I use epoxies that are approved by the National Historic Association, and they come from a company in Wisconsin. If you ever have a need for it, I can give you their name and address. And when I deal with them, I have to take pictures, or they ask me to take pictures of whatever stone that I'm working on. And they will mix the epoxy to come close to that color so that there's not a wide distinction between it, and then there's another secret to it. As I glue it, I use big bar clamps. The crack is across there, okay. And eventually, she got to be this. Now you notice that I talk about these people, or these stones, like they're somebody I know. I actually do know them, but I think that they're alive, but maybe they aren't. But anyhow, Jane, you can see my crack that I repaired across here. The next step, once I apply the epoxy to it and I get it clamped, which squeegees up all the extra, I level that out, and then I hunt, well, I've already done it, hunted for piece of a stone somewhere in the cemetery that's just like it, and I crush it into dust. I just beat it with a hammer until I get dust. And before it sets, I sprinkle that dust into that crack, which is the same color as the stone, and I press it in, and then I leave it until it cures. So then once it's done, it is as close as I can make it to looking original. Okay. The second stone that I did, which was my most challenging stone, was Susanna Watson Morrow. And her dad, and we'll talk about him shortly, is a Revolutionary War veteran. This cemetery has 5 Revolutionary War veterans in it, 1 War of 1812 veteran, 5, and I may have 6, what is referred to as original DARs. What that means is Susanna's dad is about 30 feet from her, and he was a Revolutionary veteran. You don't have to do a lot of research to figure that one out. The daughter's here, the dad's there. She's a daughter of the Revolution. The problem with Susanna was that the stone has become so soft that even to the touch in the crack, it would crumble to me. And so as I began the restoration process, I would do the epoxying, I'd do the clamping, and I would check the cracks, and then I would open the bar clamps, and she broke on me 3 times. There just wasn't enough strength. And I ended up in these V corners. I had to rebuild those, and I just used normal mortar, and then I epoxied that. And go ahead, next one. And you can see how it laid on the table. I had this to work with and fill in. And you can see the bar clamps here, which pull it together, and then the clamps here that pull it this way, okay? Once I had gotten her repaired, and you'll see a full restoration shortly, I knew that she would never stand alone. If I stood her up, eventually she would break off again. Well, I had been to the St. Philip's, St. Michael's cemeteries in Charleston, which are at the Revolution and before, and to Philadelphia and to Boston, to the old cemeteries, and taken notes on how do you deal with a stone like that. So what you do is you dig out the ground, and I laid 3 inches of concrete in it. Go ahead. Next one. And I laid the 3 inches of concrete in it with wire in the concrete. Then I built a brick pad for it, and I used period stone, or brick. The brick come from the old Van Wyck brick factory, which no longer exists, and they made brick in the early 1800s and on. The owner there was tearing down one of the original buildings. I went to him and asked him for a supply of brick and told him what I was doing, and he was very generous. So I laid a course of brick around the concrete, and then I looked at Susanna laying there, and I said, you know, if I put her there, she probably is going to break anyhow. So the next step was across that long crack that you saw that I had to fix, I put 3 bricks to keep it from sinking there. And then I steadied it with 3 more. And then I outlined the entire thing with mortar so that when I sat her down, she floated freely until it hardened. When I stepped back from it like this, and I was looking down at Susanna's place, there was the perfect sign of a cross. And I thought, I've done good at this point. She will be pleased looking down that her resting place is looking good. Okay. Now, once I was done, and this kind of is out of order, once I was done with this, this really wasn't there then. This was her spot. As I had been digging around, I found various pieces of the crown of her stone, her stone. And so I was assembling them then to build that back into the shape of the crown of her stone. Because you can't read any longer this one, and I'll tell you something funny about that. I have made for each one of these stones that we want to remember and can't read them, marker, and it does say Susanna Mara. It gives her birth date and her death date. I asked permission from the Presbyterian Church. Could I put the cross, because it was a Presbyterian church, I put the Presbyterian cross on it, and also you may not be able to read it. I asked the local DAR, because she is an original daughter of the Revolution, may I mark her as a DAR? And they said, go for it. Next. Elizabeth Wingate. This is our most recent find, and one I'm so proud of and so happy. I'm proud of every one of them. I've done 8 restorations of stones in here. This one was my favorite, other than Susanna. When my wife and I first went to the cemetery to identify and plot every stone in there, Susanna's top part, and you can see the dirt line here, was laying down against a tree. And I said, I don't know what to do with her, but we can't leave her laying next to a tree. So I turned her around from where we found her and placed her in the ground right there, which came up to that dirt line. And I had no idea where the bottom part of the stone or whether I would ever find it. 2 Decembers ago, we had ground radar survey done of the site with the hope and anticipation that I would find a lot of lost stones. Didn't work out, but I did find this particular piece, and it was over here laying underground about a foot. So we dug it up and I set it against a tree. That's my favorite thing, because I have to think on them for a while, you know. And it sat there for almost a year, and I wasn't sure whom it belonged to. So about 4 months ago, I said it's time. So I took the piece and tested it next to another stone, and it wasn't the right thickness and so forth and so on. And I said to Richard, my Vietnam buddy, I said, Richard, it's time for us to dig up Elizabeth and see what we get. So we dug Elizabeth up and we laid the stone there, and as it turned out, they were a perfect match. You couldn't get a sheet of paper. This stone had been underground preserved, so there was no deterioration. And Elizabeth, for the most part, was underground. Later on, I found an old picture that told me where she originally stood. And where I had first placed her is where she had originally stood. So the restoration was completed, and I put her back, and it's 195 years later that she is in her spot where she started from. So I am so pleased that I was able to do that particular restoration. I will tell you, and I forgot, I'm going to squirrel just a second. When we were at Susanna Morrow's stone, and that was the one that was so badly damaged and I had to lay out flat, my wife and I, Pat, was trying to read the stone. And so I had it on the ground. I had everything out to read it. and I'm standing over it, and I'm looking down, and she's over there, and I'm over here. And I said, I see it, but I can't figure out what it says. She looked at me and she said, well, if you come around this side and read it right side up, you might understand it a little better. So with a little help from my friends, I was able to read what was there. And it indeed was Susanna Morrow's. There are enough records, pictures going back in history of the stones that were there to know specifically who was who of the ones that are there. Now, there are two major stone, see, I went around in circles. There are two major stone cutters in this cemetery. Actually, there's three as of last week. J. Cavany had bought 790 acres in the King, oh shoot, it left me, in the mountains close by, and Kings Mountain, and he opened up a stone carving shop. And the reason that some of the carvers would sign their name in the bottom right-hand corner was first out of pride for their work, and second, they were leaving their calling card so that when other people came to the cemetery, they saw the stone, maybe they liked the kind of stone, they liked the kind of script and so forth, they knew who to get in contact with, okay? Jay White is another one, and he is so very famous in the state of South Carolina. He is out of Charleston, South Carolina, and he carved stones that were primarily in the low country and the middle country, but there are some in what's called the up country up here. And if you were a person that could afford to have a J. White stone, and his were in Italian marble. So if you pass by our cemetery and you look in there and you see bright white stones, even almost 200 years, they are Italian marble, and they are in mint condition still. You had to be very wealthy. The two major families, the Coffey family and the Morrow family, that have stones in here and were buried are J. White stones. They could afford to have J. White carve the stone in Charleston, put it on a wagon, and a team of people bring it all the way up to Old 6 Mile Cemetery and put it in there. At that time, you had to have some bucks. Well, these folks also owned thousands, or about 1,000 or more acres of plantation around the area. So they had the means to do it. Now, there is one other that I just learned about 2 weeks ago. There is a Bigham, B-I-G-H-A-M, family out of Charlotte that carves stones mostly in slate and have some very interesting script and carvings on them. And it has come to my attention that we have 2 of those stones in 6 Mile Cemetery. They never signed their stones, but because of the slate and the proximity to this area, people that saw them would know that that's the shop that did carve them. As we began to get things repaired, the land cleared, things done, we thought maybe it would be a good thing for visitors when they came if they knew what they were looking at. So we commissioned this monument. It's not really that big, it's a little unobtrusive. And it gives a short history of the 6 Mile Cemetery, the revolutionaries that are buried, and a few other inscriptions. And donors from all over the area contributed to having this stone made. So if you came up there at that time, we've gotten a little bit more high tech that I'll tell you about. You would at least know why you're there. Okay. Now, a couple of the veterans there, Captain Hugh Coffey, Revolutionary War veteran. Now, he was from Prince George County in Virginia. That's where he came down from, and his family. And the Coffeys are a good example of what people did at that time with spelling of their last names. If you notice, he is C-O-F-F-E-E. His brother, Henry Coffey, who served with him, is C-O-F-E-Y. And what they would do is sometimes change the spelling of their last name for the branch of the family. Or maybe they just liked it that way. I don't know. But the most times it was for the branches of the family. And it's like when we get to the Hagans, there's 5 different spellings of Hagans. There's 4 different spellings of Wingates. So it just depended. But Hugh and his brother, which amazed me, you guys might know this, more battles in the Revolution were fought in South Carolina than anywhere else in the Union. These 2 guys were battle crazy. They fought in doggone near every battle that they could get into, and how they lived through it is beyond me, because they just courted death nonstop. The one battle that they did miss was at Beaufort, and of course that was a massacre. So they did live through that one by not attending. Private Josh Gordon, this is him. That's his stone. And for each one of the veterans, I did make a separate stone, and it indicated that they were Revolutionary War veterans, their name, their rank, and their birth and death date. And I did it that way for 2 reasons. I could have applied to the Veterans Administration and had the national markers put on there. The problem with that is they don't match up to anything that's there, and it would look so out of place. So I set the flat markers down. Now, one of the handicaps for Josh is that I don't really know where he was buried. I know he's there, but his daughter, Anne, is buried right here. And this is one of those Bigham stones that are represented by that shop. I knew Anne, his daughter, was there. As the families in the cemetery go, all families are buried mostly together, one next to the other. So I made an executive decision to put Josh next to his daughter. One of the things I note in my documents when I do this, I know that I don't know where he is. So I just write in there, that's where he is temporarily placed until such time somebody finds a document that tells me, or a picture, something other, then I can pick up that about 40 pounds and move it to wherever it needs to go. Okay. Colonel Hagen's our most famous Revolutionary War veteran, not only in the cemetery but in this area. He was commander of the Mecklenburg and 6 Mile Creek militia, and he fought in many, many battles in the Revolution. Kings Mountain, Battle of Hanging Rock, in this area. But he mustered the troops, and they were under Sumter at that time. Of course, I made him that stone. His son is over here. I do know that he is there. About 8 years ago, Richard, the guy that lives behind, went on a long trip, and when he came back, Colonel Hagen's stone was gone. And he described it to me, but it had the cross sabers at the top and so forth, apparently a beautiful stone. I have been looking for a picture of that stone. I have the funds that were donated by Hagen's families to have a reproduction done of it. This is one of his sons who accompanied him to the Battle of Hanging Rock and took a saber cut to his shoulder. He didn't die of it. There are no military records that he was a Revolutionary War soldier, but I treat him as a veteran because I figure if you go into battle and you get a saber to the shoulder, then you're a veteran of the war. So in any case, here there's going to be another picture of something I recently placed here. Okay. And there she is. Colonel Hagen's wife, Mary Patton Hagens. There is a Patton family in the cemetery. There's a nice long line of them. And the Pattons came down from Tennessee, and their background was making gunpowder. And the Patton family made the 500 pounds of gunpowder used by the revolutionaries at the war, at the Battle of Kings Mountain. And she is a member of the family. She didn't necessarily make any gunpowder, but that's what they were noted for. Well, she, after Colonel Hagen's passed, she moved to York County with her daughter, and the trail went cold there. Both the Patton family and the Hagen's family have, over the years, made contacts with me to locate her. And of course, I have no idea where she is, but I said, I'll tell you, if you give me permission, what we can do for future generations and for you, I will have a stone, because had she been buried here, she would have been buried next to her husband, unless she is, which I don't know. So I had a stone made for her with her name and birth and death date, but I had inscribed at the bottom that the actual location of her burial is unknown. And in my notes forever says that if you ever find where she is, the stone can be moved to that spot. Okay. One beautiful example of a marked stone with no, or a stone with no marks, is Lieutenant Drury Watson. And this is the military stone that I put down for him. But this is a piece of petrified wood. And all down through the historical records of that cemetery, it names him next to the piece of petrified wood. And a lot of times when people come out to an old cemetery, and especially this one, they have what's called field stones. And this is a field stone, or can be called a field stone even though it's petrified. If you look back in here, you'll see like there's a field stone there. There's lots of them through here that you can't see. The old families did not have the money to have a marker made. So they probably went down to 12 Mile Creek and broke out a piece of flat rock and used another rock to beat it to a point on each side, and they used that as the headstone, and then they got a smaller piece and put as a footstone. And then the question always comes to me, well, how do you know who's who? And I said, I really don't know who's who, but at that time, when you buried Auntie Susan in that spot, and you went down and got that rock and you shaped it, you put it in, and you brought relatives up there and said, oh yeah, that's the rock that I made that marked Auntie Susan's grave. So it was passed down. The problem is, almost 200 years later, we don't know any of those people anymore. But at that time, every rock, every field rock is an individual stone, and when you sit there and look at them, no two are alike, and they could distinguish between them. Okay. I'm back to Susanna. This is the repair job, and there was nothing I could do about it. You can see the strip where I had to do so much epoxy 3 times to get it to hold, which tells you I could never stand it up. That's how she lies now, and it is in the exact spot as recorded, and still the stones here are being collected. The pad is behind it, and I have finished that headpiece now. Okay. There is now a women's memorial to the women who fought and served in the Revolutionary War. And there are many, many stories, and a lot of people don't know that, and younger people don't know that, so I'm speaking to the young girls now. The families went to battle with their husbands, wives, children. Everybody went to battle. The wives acted as nurses a lot of times. The children helped cook or take care of their dad and so forth. Well, there are only 8 stones in South Carolina that memorialize the women that served in the Revolution. We're one of 8. There is a QR code here that when you hit that QR code, Dorothy, the lady that helps me with all of the electronics and research and so forth, she has gone into the records all over the country of stories of women that have served. They served as nurses, cooks, they served as spies. They would go into the British camps and volunteer to cook for British soldiers, and then serve them, and as they were giving them food, they would listen to everything that was being said, battle plans, whatever, when they were leaving, where they were going, and then they would report it back to the revolutionaries. Very dangerous job, because at that time, if you were found a spy, they hung you. And so it was a very, very valuable thing to do, but also dangerous. My most favorite is early on in the battle, prior to the swamp fox and guerrilla warfare, the revolutionaries and the British would line up across a field, and they would get in line and they'd take their rifles and they'd shoot at each other. And I thought, man, that's crazy. You know, that's asking to go to here beyond. But as you go out there and see a musket, they only fire one time. They only got one shot. So they would make their shot, and then they're standing there with the volley coming at them. Well, they would hand it, the women would be behind them. They would hand the rifle or the musket to the women, and at the same time, the women would hand it, a new one back, or a loaded one back to them, and they were back there reloading so that they could continue the battle. The only problem with that was if one of the guys got shot in the chest, there was this open gap, and the ladies were standing there waiting for the next one to come. So it was a very dangerous spot for women to be. But that's the kind of things they did so that all of us could have the pleasure of sitting here today to enjoy this place in this time. Because if they hadn't have done that and those revolutionaries had not won, we probably wouldn't be at this gathering. We are a South Carolina historical site. It's a 2-sided sign. The significance of that is that it is protected by law now in South Carolina. Nobody can intrude on it, no development, no anything. It is there forever for everyone to see. Okay. And this is the end. We do have a brochure box, and this picture has now at the bottom of it, it has a QR code that takes you on a guided tour of the cemetery. So if you go up there now, you don't have to have me physically, but you'll hear my voice. And there are 11 stations, they're all numbered, and as you go to the station, like number 1, it will tell you, turn to the left and go to so many steps to number 2. And then I narrate the history of that. So I go into real deep detail on those people. And then there's a QR code at the top, which takes you to the Facebook page, Old 6 Mile Cemetery Facebook page. And on there is a link to the Women's Memorial and a link to the tour. So you can get to it 2 separate ways. We are marked by state or the Park Service signs. We're not a Park Service, but we have their signs, so you know when you get there. And we have a nice little spot if you